Week 20, Overview, Early New World Colonies and Eastern Europe. Over the next 8 weeks, we'll be studying colonial America, from the founding of the first European colonies on American soil to the middle of the 18th century. If you've studied this period in the past, you already know some of the stories from early American history, but there's always so much more to discover as we trace what God has done in human history. This period of history is called the colonial period in America because during this time, the settlements were colonies of diverse European countries. The New World was different from the Old in significant ways, but the colonists didn't yet think of themselves as Americans. They were Englishmen, Scotsmen, Dutchmen, Frenchmen, Swedes, or Germans. As such, they brought their traditions, their cultural and religious beliefs, and their expectations with them to the colonies. Throughout this unit, older students will focus on colonial America plus ongoing developments back in Europe. Although much of what happened in colonial America was a direct result of what was going on in Europe, few people get the chance to make connections between these two regional histories. It's exciting to see how God was weaving together events on both sides of the Atlantic. Your kids will begin the week by noting the first permanent European settlement in America, the Spanish settlement of St. Augustine, founded in 1565. That was in the middle of Queen Elizabeth's reign, when the Spaniards still ruled the seas. In 1584, Sir Walter Raleigh named the coast of North America Virginia for the Virgin Queen. When I was a boy, I often heard the story of how Sir Walter Raleigh put his coat in the mud to keep his queen from stepping in a puddle. He's the one who drove Spain crazy with his daring exploits on the sea. To the Spaniards, Sir Walter Raleigh was nothing more than a pirate. He tried to plant a colony in Virginia in 1585, but his adventurers soon realized they had picked a bad location. They abandoned that first settlement. Sir Walter tried again next year. This time, he sent a group to an island they called Roanoke, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. It included some people who had given up the first time, like John White, who brought his daughter Eleanor Dare and her husband along with him. This time, things seemed to go better. Eleanor gave birth to the first English baby to be born in America a few weeks after they landed. They called her Virginia Dare. John White left his new granddaughter at Roanoke to sail back to England for more supplies. White planned to be back within 3 months, but what he didn't plan on was war with Spain, provoked, in part, by Sir Walter Raleigh's attacks on Spanish shipping. Every English ship was confiscated to fend off the threat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. Those were dark days for England. An immense Spanish fleet carried a huge army ready to invade Britain, but the English navy and adverse winds destroyed that fleet and drove the remnant all the way around the top of Scotland before the Spanish stragglers made it home. John White didn't get back to America until 1590, 3 years later, not 3 months. When he reached Roanoke, it was deserted. The only clue the colonists left behind was one word, Croatoan, carved on a tree trunk. Where did they go? Nobody knows for sure. John White believed they had moved to the island of Croatoan, to the south of Roanoke, where there had been friendly Indians, but bad weather kept him from finding them. It may be that some of the Roanoke colonists survived and married into the native tribes. The Lumbee Indians of North Carolina claim to be their descendants. Roanoke has been the lost colony ever since. Sir Walter Raleigh never got his colony. Queen Elizabeth died in 1603, and he was thrown into prison by the new king. Since Elizabeth had never married, the crown had passed to her godson, King James VI of Scotland. James gave us the King James Bible and Jamestown, the first permanent colony in America. Jamestown was founded by adventurers who were looking for a way to make money. The Spanish had discovered vast amounts of gold in the New World. Why shouldn't the English? Many Europeans believed America must be littered with the stuff. Of course, it was a dangerous enterprise. Ships could sink, there might be hostile natives. But as far back as the Middle Ages, merchants had learned how to form joint stock companies to pool their resources and limit their risks. A group of merchants and other investors formed the Virginia Company of London, like any other business venture. The problem is, colonizing a new world isn't just another business venture. It's more like being in a war, where working hard and working together makes the difference between life and death. The 105 men and boys who landed in Virginia in the spring of 1607 were radically unprepared for the challenge before them. It's not that they weren't clear on their mission. They came to look for gold and silver, and, if possible, convert the Indians to Christianity. The problem was they had the wrong mission and the wrong men. What they needed was food, not gold, and it's not so clear that the adventurers had really been converted to Christianity. Many of the gentlemen adventurers refused to work, follow orders, or keep their hands off the food supplies. Getting the mission and the men wrong was bad, but the settlers' next big mistake was the location of their new colony. The ground around Jamestown was swampy, and there was no good source of fresh water. They were looking for gold and silver, not food, so they lived off their dried English food supplies. Poor nutrition weakened them, but they needed all the strength they could get right then. The natives were anything but friendly, but the Indians weren't their deadliest enemy. Mosquitoes and microorganisms were worse. The first carried malaria, the second gave them dysentery. When it got cold, pneumonia set in. 2/3 of the adventurers died. They might have all died if it hadn't been for Captain John Smith, a soldier who had fought in Holland and Eastern Europe. When the Turks had captured him there and sold him into slavery, he escaped and made his way back to England by way of Russia. Smith was no gentleman, but after that first dreadful year of dying, the survivors elected him, a farmer's son, their president. He whipped them into shape in no time with a simple motto: work or starve. Smith had a real mix of personal strengths and weaknesses. Men either loved him or hated him. He believed in action, not tact. He forced the adventurers to give up the quest for gold in order to find food. He was both brave and quarrelsome, a little too ready for a fight. Smith bought corn from the Indians, a risky business, since 30 tribes had united under the leadership of one chief, Powhatan. On one trip, Indians captured Smith, and Powhatan prepared to crush his skull with his war club. His young daughter, Pocahontas, cradled Smith's head in her arms and saved his life. Pocahontas became Smith's friend and warned him of at least one Indian attack. That didn't keep Smith from treating the natives harshly. He used force and fear to keep his enemies at bay. That worked reasonably well while he was in command, but an accident in 1609 sent him back to England. Those were bad days for Jamestown. They suffered from fire, drought, disease, attacks, and another long winter of starvation. The self-centered gentlemen were helpless without a strong leader. The colony dropped from 500 men to 60 during what later colonists called the starving time. Fresh ships saved Jamestown from abandonment. The ships brought new settlers, supplies, and Jamestown's first royal governor, Lord Delaware. The colonists welcomed him. By this time, they were glad of any help they could get. That's all we have time for on Jamestown, but there's quite a bit more to the story of Pocahontas. After John Smith was wounded, the colonists didn't see her for the next few years. In 1613, though, she was lured on board an English ship where she was held captive, and where she met and married another Englishman, John Rolfe. Pocahontas became a Christian and was baptized under the name of Rebecca. She married John Rolfe, and the two of them went to England in 1616, where she was welcomed as an Indian princess. Sadly, Pocahontas contracted smallpox while she was getting ready to sail home, and she died before the ship left harbor. Her little son, Thomas Rolfe, got sick, too. He stayed in England for some years before returning to Virginia, where he became a prominent citizen. Many Virginia families still trace their heritage back to Pocahontas. Pocahontas left America behind, and so must we before we're done looking at this week's material. Much of Europe was fighting the 30 Years' War while the little colony at Jamestown was growing. This war began in 1618 with an unusual event, the defenestration of Prague. If you like big words, it's hard to beat defenestration. It comes from Latin, de meaning out of, and fenestra meaning window. Try it on your kids in the car. Don't defenestrate that trash, Johnny. There's a $500 fine for littering. The word was coined in 1618 when angry Protestants threw 2 imperial governors and their scribe out of the high windows in an official building in Prague, in what is now the Czech Republic. The 70-foot fall should have killed them, but all 3 men lived. Catholics attributed their survival to divine intervention. Protestants thought it had more to do with a big pile of horse manure in the empty moat they landed in. That incident kicked off a political-religious war that involved most of continental Europe. The predominantly Protestant people of Prague, the capital of Bohemia, revolted against their Ferdinand, the Catholic king, and put a Protestant in his place. That backfired when Ferdinand was elected Holy Roman Emperor in 1619. He sent troops to crush the Bohemian revolt. Denmark saw what had happened to Bohemia and revolted in turn, and then King Gustav of Sweden stepped in to help his Danish neighbors. As is so often the case in religious wars, politics began to matter more than religion. Catholic France began to help the Protestants in order to undermine the rival power of the Holy Roman Empire. By 1644, the many provinces of the Holy Roman Empire had been turned upside down by war for decades. That year, the nations of Europe sent delegates to Westphalia, in what is now Western Germany, to negotiate a truce. It took 4 years of talks, but the Peace of Westphalia finally ended the 30 Years' War. It also ended an even longer-running conflict, the 80 Years' War between Spain and Holland. The Peace of Westphalia established the basic rules for religion on the continent. 90 years earlier, the Peace of Augsburg had allowed each local ruler in the Holy Roman Empire to choose whether his state would be Lutheran or Catholic, without any interference from above. The Peace of Westphalia required every warring state to accept the principles of the Peace of Augsburg and expanded it. Under this new treaty, a prince could choose Calvinism as a valid religious alternative, along with Catholicism and Lutheranism. There were political effects to the peace as well. Spain began a long, slow descent into obscurity. France was on the rise. It acquired the Germanic territories of Alsace and Lorraine. Those Germanic areas proved to be a source of chronic conflict over the next 300 years. French and Germans would still be fighting each other over them in World War II. The 30 Years' War didn't establish religious freedom, but it did allow for religious diversity. Neighboring states could have different beliefs. The religious settlement that Europe was working out through 30 years of war had its counterpart in the American colonies. Jamestown was founded by loyal Englishmen who were members of the Anglican Church, so Virginia was Anglican. The Pilgrims who landed at Plymouth Rock had very different beliefs, but we'll get to them next week. And we'll find out why the Baptists founded Rhode Island the week after that. By the end of this unit, we'll know enough about these differences to begin to appreciate how much of a miracle it was for all these different colonies to come together into these United States.